Everyone, welcome back. Dr. Aslan is going to now introduce Dr. Nasr, who apparently is already waiting for us to connect with him. So I'm going to let Dr. Nasr give the introduction.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, respected scholars and friends. It is a great honor to introduce Seyyed Hossein Nasr, since I consider myself a student of Dr. Nasr. Formally, I have not had the privilege of becoming his student. However, I educated myself through reading his books. I wrote my PhD thesis on him, comparing him with John Hick. In 1992, I had a great opportunity to interview Dr. Nasr with John Hick, which was published as an appendix of my book, Religious Pluralism in Islamic and Christian Philosophy, the thought of John Hick and Seyyed Hossein Nasr. It would not be easy to introduce such a great figure and great philosopher. Seyyed Hossein Nasr is University Professor of Islamic Studies at George Washington University. He has authored over 50 books and over 500 articles, including pioneering works on religion and environment, such as Man and Nature, the Spiritual Crisis in Modern Man, and Religion, the Order of Nature, which was the result of Cadbury lectures at Birmingham University. I had a unique opportunity to attend this lecture. Dr. Nasr is an internationally recognized Islamic philosopher in both the Islamic world and the West. His deep understanding of Western civilization and of traditional Islamic philosophy, art, and spirituality places him in the unique position to present Islam in its depths, while distinguishing it from the modernism and fundamentalism. He has been recognized by the Western intellectual milieu by having been the first Muslim to deliver the prestigious Gifford Lectures in 1981, which resulted in a great book entitled as Knowledge and the Sacred, which I consider a classic. I do not know how many times I have read this book. This is the nature of a classic. Every time you read it, you will understand something new and something different. He was also first traditional Islamic philosopher to be inducted into the Library of Living Philosophers, where a volume titled The Philosophy of Seyyed Hossein Nasr was dedicated to his intellectual exposition of such subjects as metaphysics, spirituality, art, the environment, and the science. He has been Dean of the Faculty of Arts of Tehran University from 1968 to 1972, President of Arya Mehr University from 1972 and to 1975, and founder and first president of the Imperial Iranian Academy of Philosophy from 1973 to 1979. Since graduating from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Harvard University in the 1950s, and in addition to his writings, Dr. Nasr's productivity has continued with his training of several generations of scholars. Dr. Nasr Thank you so much for your generosity of providing an opportunity for us to listen to you. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dr. Aslan, my dear friend, the Turks, like Persian, are sometimes given to exaggeration, and you exaggerated in your comments. My humble service to the cause of metaphysics and the perennial philosophy. I'm very glad that you're settled in again after all the problems that you confront in life, and you're able to participate in this conference. And also my greetings to everyone else who is present and those who are listening by Zoom, many of whom I know personally. I'm sorry that my health did not allow me to come to Notre Dame itself. I've been to Notre Dame many times. I've lectured there often. And when Knowledge on the Sacred came out, Notre Dame was the first Catholic university in this country that made it a textbook in its course on theology. And several professors from Notre Dame contacted me. And in fact, I went there and gave a lecture on this subject. Anyway, what I was asked to speak about today is the perennial philosophy and why we need it today, why it's important today. I know many of you are experts and have given very good talks in the last 2 days and will do so during the rest of the conference. But nevertheless, I presume this being the keynote address, I should clarify the terms and the ideas that we use in talking about the perennial philosophy and say a little about its history. The term perennial philosophy as such does not appear in medieval Latin texts in the West, nor is it used in Greek philosophy in that exact sense. Of course, the idea of it is there from the very beginning. It's there from Pythagoras. But I mean, the use of the term, the Philosophia Perennis, it was used for the first time in the West by the keeper of Arabic manuscripts of the Vatican Library, Stoico, who gained access to many Arabic texts in that incredibly rich library, all of whose Arabic texts have not been cataloged even today. I've been there where there are books around all these rooms, never been fully studied. And Stoico there discovered, in fact, some works of Islamic thought in which this term was used. And the term perennial philosophy in the West, Philosophia Perennis, almost definitely originates from its usage in the Islamic world. It was used for the first time by a well-known author, by a man called Miskawayh or Moskouye in Persian, famous moralist and philosopher and theologian of the 11th century, the 4th Islamic century, in a book called Javidan Kharad, which is a Persian word for perennial philosophy. Although the text is in Arabic, the title is in Persian. And soon it became known also as a Hikmatul Khalida, which is the Arabic word for perennial philosophy. But the great expositor of the perennial philosophy was Sohrawardi, the great founder of the School of Illumination in the 12th century. And there he mentioned something which is very important for the traditional understanding of what perennial philosophy is. Sohrawardi says that when God created man, he put a drop of the divine wisdom in the clay with which he kneaded the body of man. And so that drop of wisdom has been with humanity from the beginning of the human kind, the human race in the world. As many of you know, in Islamic prophetology, Adam is considered to be the first prophet as well as the first man. And as such, he already was a professor, that is professed, not professor in the sense of teacher, a professor of Tawheed, of La ilaha illallah, which is foundational to the perennial philosophy. The perennial philosophy, in its essence, which is a doctrine of the unity of the divine principle, has been there from the very beginning, therefore, is perennial, and was not something that was added later on in human history. Of course, in the West, the ideas were very different. I do not have time to go into the particular case of Christianity, which basing itself on the single event of descent of the God-man, of the Son of God, of Christ in history, did not emphasize the perennial character of revealed prophetic intuitive knowledge, which is foundational to perennial philosophy. But nevertheless, even in Christianity, Christian Platonists from Clement of Alexandria to Augustine to many others already spoke about Plato being a Christian before Christ in the sense of the eternal Christianity. So something of that was also present. And we have allusions to this kind of perennial wisdom even before the term became prevalent in the West through Stoico, but much more through Leibniz, who in a letter in 1706 wrote that I'm a follower of the perennial philosophy. Of course, the monadism of Leibniz is not perennial philosophy, but nevertheless, he showed interest in the idea, and from there, gradually, the idea caught on, and we reach its modern history, where in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, in the middle of the most secularist period, really, of Western intellectual and philosophical history, a number of people appeared, including the Catholic Church, who considered Thomism to be perennial philosophy, and others also Christian Platonism. And the term gradually came into usage, abetted at that time by the fact that the Vivekananda movement from Ramakrishna in India was beginning to spread also to the West, and they spoke about Sanatana Dharma, which is Sanskrit equivalent really of the perennial philosophy, and people began to pay attention to this idea. And from that background, that after the Second World War, the term really came into full usage with a book of Aldous Huxley called The Perennial Philosophy. Now, Huxley was not really a perennialist in our understanding of the term. I mean people like me who are traditionalists, traditional thinkers. His brother, Julian Huxley, was a famous atheist, and Aldous Huxley, fleeing from that worldview, tried to find in other religions a unity of truth that he called the perennial philosophy, but it was not succinct and metaphysical as it should be. But nevertheless, his book, culling together a large number of texts from different traditions, brought this term into fuller usage and gradually became very popular, rejected for a long, long time by historians of religion, who were either historicists and Orientalists or phenomenologists after Husserl. This idea of the perennial philosophy did not find a home until about 40, 50 years ago, when gradually a number of philosophers of religion began to say that at least this is one of the ways of studying the various religions of the world. So the perennial philosophy has a very checkered career. And there are a large number of thinkers in the West who said there's no perennial philosophy, but there are perennial questions of philosophy. There were perennial questions. That is not perennial philosophy. Those who really believe in perennial philosophy in the traditional sense believe also there are perennial answers. Not are there only perennial questions. Yes, there are perennial questions. Who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? What is the meaning of life? Whether you were living in a cave 30 years ago in Lascaux or living in New York now, these questions come up into the minds of human beings, and they are, in a sense, perennial questions. But the perennials are those who believe there are also perennial answers to these questions. And this was not time determined based on cultural, social, and other factors for the Marxist economic factors that determine the sway and change of ideas over time. Time is not the father of truth in perennial philosophy. Time is one of the conditions of the world created by the truth, which is a very, very different matter. Anyway, during the last few decades, a number of very important metaphysical works based on the perennial philosophy have come into being. Some of them written by Guénon, some by Friedrich Schwann, by others. And Schwann also used the term Sophia perennis and Religio perennis in addition to Philosophia perennis, which is very meaningful because for some people that thought that just thought about perennial philosophy, they would be perennialists. whereas Sophia means also realized wisdom, and of course religio means the perennial religion, which is the religion of oneness, which is at the heart of all religions according to the perennialists. And anyway, we have now a large number of very important works from this point of view, as there are from other points of view, and that's why you have this conference now in a major Catholic university in the United States on the perennial philosophy, as far as I know, it's the very first time. When I first gave a lecture at Harvard University half a century ago, I was visiting professor there, the perennial philosophy, many people didn't know what it was. Some great scholars like Wolfson and so on, of course, knew, but the very gifted students in the class that had no awareness of this category. This is no longer the case. The term perennial philosophy, whatever connotation one gives to it, is now a well-known term. Now, I want to turn, having said these few words, to what perennialists like myself, who are also traditionalists, believe the perennial philosophy to be about. What is it about? What parts does it have? What does it entail? First of all, it is not a philosophy in the ordinary sense, but of course, philosophy in the sense of that Sophia, that Pythagoras was humble enough not to use for himself, and himself calling himself a lover of philosophy, from which comes a use of the term philosophia. It deals with the Sophia, with the wisdom that first of all concerns the principles of things, the first principles, the origin of reality. What is real? The most important question that is asked in the perennial philosophy is, what is real? Secondly, how do we know what is real? What is our way of knowing what is real? And thirdly, what are the consequences of this knowledge? Otherwise, just like learning a few mathematical formulas or learning Norwegian or so on. It's a question of what I say in Norwegian that matters. So the consequences of it are also very, very important. And therefore, it's not just theoretical philosophy in the modern sense. This is a very important point to emphasize. In modern philosophy, whether you are a logical positivist, existentialist, or this or that, structuralist, whatever you are, postmodernist, when you are walking the street, you walk the same way, you wear the same clothing, you eat the same food, you talk the same thing, more or less, unless you get to philosophy. Whereas perennial philosophy is meant to transform the whole being of man and woman, of human beings. It's not only for the mind. This is the first important thing to learn. What does it talk about, therefore? It talks about, most of all, about what is real. Now, the answer to that is given in that science which is called metaphysics. And from the point of view of the perennial philosophy, metaphysics is much misunderstood in many circles in the world today and has a long history. We use the word metaphysics as a science of sort of supreme principles and so forth, but actually, as you all know, originally the Bible was read after the physics. Aristotle uses it as a book to come after the metaphysical, to come after, not beyond. But soon, especially in Islamic civilization, which had a very big role to play, of course, in medieval Western intellectuality and later ideas in the West, the great debate took place. What really meta meant? Did it only mean after, or did it mean beyond, something above? And in Islam, funnily, it's the term ma ba'd al-tabi'a, which is the Arabic word for literally metaphysica, came to be understood as what the Quran calls hikmah, divine wisdom. It's Sophia itself, not only what comes after Aristotle's physics, but at the same time, science, which is primary and concerns the nature of reality, including what is studied in physics. And so, first of all, metaphysics deals with what is the nature of reality in the ultimate sense? And secondly, what is the nature of manifestation, the reality of manifestation in light of the divine reality, of the principial reality, both of them. Now, let's start with the first. The perennial philosophy begins in its deepest sense with what cannot be uttered. I always quote this wonderful first verse of the Tao Te Ching: the name that can be named is not the name. It's not, the Tao is beyond everything you can name of it. I mean, the supreme Tao. And everything issues from that. The 10,000 things and so forth issue from that. And so it begins really with the ineffable. It begins from silence. It begins like life itself. We come from silence and we return to silence. And it comes from that principial silence from which comes sound or meaning or nouns or things, all of them. Nevertheless, God has given us the intelligence to talk about it somehow. So the human intelligence is not the modern reason. That's one of the main points of the perennial philosophy. Intelligence and reason were equated together. One of the greatest mistakes of modern civilization from the perennial point of view of perennial philosophy. It doesn't come from that. The intellect is a divine instrument, a divine faculty that God has placed within us. It ultimately belongs to God and has levels, as Islamic philosophy and through it medieval Western philosophy have also discussed. St. Thomas and Bonaventure, they all speak about this, and later philosophers. It is not the same thing as reason. And therefore, the whole Kantian and post-Kantian understanding of the very word metaphysics is rejected by the perennial philosophy completely. That's not metaphysics. That's a physicalism which Kant adopted as foundation for philosophy. And when we use the word metaphysics, we do not mean it in that sense at all. If we were speaking Hindi or Urdu or Sanskrit or Persian or Arabic or Chinese, we would not have these problems. But since we're speaking English, it carries with it the history of what happened to these ideas, and therefore they have to be clarified. Metaphysics is the heart of the perennial philosophy. It's first of all the science of the real, and it begins, as I said, with silence. How do we define that? How do you define the real? The real is that which has no boundary, because to define means to draw a limit around something. And by that, you limit it. The infinite is indefinable for that reason. Even in mathematics, we have trouble with it, with the mathematical infinite because of that. It's not an ordinary number. It explodes, it reduces things to nothing, and so forth. There's a deep metaphysical aspect to this aspect of mathematics if one pays attention to it. Anyway, it begins with that which is above all manifestation. And therefore, later on, when metaphysics developed in later civilization, Islamic, Jewish, Christian, Hindu, and Buddhist, and so forth, other terms were used, and just sticking to the English language, the term non-being, or what the Germans call Urgrund, the ground of being, was considered to be the highest reality by which you can say nothing but except that it's the ground of all that we can say something about. And its first determination is being, and the first determination of being is the highest level of becoming, and gradually from that, the levels of existence and cosmic existence and human existence, which is part of the cosmic existence, comes into being. So the heart of the perennial philosophy is pure metaphysics. On the level of the object, I just said something about it. On the level of the subject, there's something in us who knows that, who's able to know that. Something in me that enables me to make these statements. And that is also based on a hierarchy of a microcosmic con, something which is within ourselves. And we're not bound by our mind. The mind is only an external reflection of the intellect. It's not the intellect. Once we equate the intellectual and the mental, the whole of the metaphysical view disappears, as has happened in modern times. So there is in us a reality that is able to know the real with a capital R, because it is itself the seat of the real. At the center of man resides the divine reality. It's interesting, even in English, when you memorize something, you say you know it by heart. You don't say you know it by mind. Heart still has that metaphysical meaning in the English language, and also in French, the cœur, and German, all of these European languages still bear that imprint. And same in Arabic, Persian, qalb, dil, all of these words. The center of knowledge is the heart. The instrument of knowledge is the heart. It's heart knowledge. And that has to be opened up. It's the same way that when we are born, the baby has to open up its eyes in order to see the world. In order to see the spiritual world, the inner eye has to be opened up. And this is the origin of a very widespread idea in the Prana philosophy of the inner eye, the third eye, which you see in Hinduism, you see in Islam, Ainul Qalb in Arabic, Chashmadal in Persian, and so forth, the eye of the heart, you have in certain European texts, and so forth and so on. There is an eye, E-Y-E, in our eye, capital I, which is located at the center of our heart, and the perennial philosophy can be grasped only if that eye opens. And now there's much to say about this, and with a lecture like that, I cannot, of course, deal with that completely, but I just want to point that out. There's a lot that has been written by perennial philosophers about the symbolism of two external eyes and only one eye of the heart. Because the external eyes see multiplicity, and therefore the two, whereas the inner heart sees the one, sees the principle. There's only one eye of the heart. You don't have two eyes of the heart. You only have one eye of the heart. And so you have this inner spiritual organism, you might say, which corresponds to the external faculties that we have, especially the eye, with which human beings are able to see, which also means to know the divine principle itself. Then, on the basis of that, there is manifestation. And here, the perennial philosophy was severely criticized in days of old when modern science arose, because the medieval worldview used Aristotelian cosmology, which was rejected by Galileo and others, and therefore what stood behind it, the levels of being, the hierarchy of existence, the universe had not been bound only to the material, all of that collapsed. And so the very word cosmos lost its meaning in modern science. I always say there's no such thing as modern cosmology, because the cosmos is not limited only to the material. Whereas modern cosmology, even if it talks about billions of light years, is still purely quantity. It's the world of quantity. Whereas traditional cosmology sees this vast, vast quantity world as like a speck on the surface of the ocean. It's a very small aspect of total reality. And so we have to be very careful in using our terms if we are going to understand what traditional perennial philosophy is. Anyway, on the basis of that metaphysics, it developed a cosmology, a science of both the macrocosm and the microcosm, a science of the soul, a science of the cosmos, not to be confused with modern psychology at all. Traditional psychology is very different, because traditional psychology deals with various states of being, which modern psychology does not. It only deals with the human psyche on one level. And the same with cosmology, as I just mentioned. Then there is another aspect to the perennial philosophy, and that is the aspect of living according to that reality. How, all right, now I know all these things, so what? Now let's go have a cup of coffee together, maybe learn all of these things, so what? It has to transform one's being. Principial knowledge, as Friedrich Schwann says so beautifully, wounds the soul. We have to be wounded by that knowledge, to be transformed by that knowledge. And therefore there comes what we call usually the inner aspects of religions. That is, spiritual paths that existed in all traditions. We use the word esotericism, which has now been misused by some people, and therefore has to be clarified. Esotericism means the inner. Ezo from Greek means the inner aspect of religion, which necessitates itself the exo. If there is no exo, there is no ezo. So the idea that perennial philosophy is indifferent to exoteric religion is totally false from the point of view of traditional perennial philosophy. No matter how much has been written about it, yours truly has written many, many pages on this, still this is repeated all the time. In order to understand, in a sense, to make one's own, to make into one's being the truth of perennial philosophy, there's need of a binding to the source of perennial philosophy, which is what religion is. Religions from religat to bind is what binds us to God. And therefore, we have to renew that binding, that being tied up to the divine reality, with the help of which the ideas of the perennial philosophy then become lived. All right. If that is the case, what are its consequences? First of all, although we live in a world today in which usually many religions in the West just emphasize ethics, with indifference to cosmology and metaphysics, ethics is always related, in a traditional point of view, to metaphysics. Perennial philosophy, in its real sense, is not indifferent to ethics. It's not bound only to morality or ethics. Its ultimate source is knowledge of the one, and being that knowledge. But to do so, one has to have ethical norms. And so from the perennial philosophy, which is the heart of all religions, issues ethical norms. Also, human beings not only do, which ethics deals with, but also make. What should be called aesthetics, not the Greek sense of aesthesis, the skin, the surface, but the science of beauty. It's in our nature, the nature of human beings to make. And the perennial philosophy in all different civilizations played a direct role through the religion of that civilization in the art that was created, from poetry and music to architecture to cloth to designs to everything else. I don't have time here to talk about traditional art, but the role of perennial philosophy in the creation of traditional art is extremely significant. That's the only thing that made possible for great works of art to be created not by one person, sometimes by many over generations. The Chartres Cathedral, the greatest cathedral of medieval Europe, perhaps, at least from my point of view, one of the great masterpieces of Gothic art. How long did it take to make that? Several generations of people. How did that continuity take place? There was a wisdom that was transmitted, which was based on the idea that it was an eternal wisdom. Not that, oh, this was 12th century, now we're in the 13th century, so the old Tower of Chartres Cathedral is out of date, let's do something else. That was not the worldview. That was not the worldview of a traditional man. And perennial philosophy was always connected to sacred art, especially sacred art, which is at the heart of traditional art everywhere. And you see that in India, you see that in Buddhist art, in Islamic art, in Christian art, in Orthodox art. The face icon painted was inspired by the angel at St. Luke, and we have all of this in different religions, different ways. And so from the primitive philosophy, there also flowed this art, which was always an expression of truth. Art was always useful in the deepest sense of the need of human beings for truth. Many people think a modern art is not practical, useless, otherwise becomes industry. This division, of course, did not exist in traditional time. The perennial philosophy provided a very profound philosophy of art, which was the prerogative of men like Ananda Kumaraswamy, Titus Burkhardt, other great followers of the perennial philosophy and traditional art to expound. Now we have the doctrine before us, which did not have a century ago, because much of that was oral in various traditions. It was handed down orally. There were very few texts. These great Hindu temples. How many books do you have in Sanskrit on how they were built? So only one has been discovered. And the same is true for great Islamic mosques. Who built the Sultan Hassan Mosque? Where is the blueprint? Where's the plans that we would have now if you were building a big building and bringing modern architect? It was oral tradition based on wisdom, based on spiritual practice. His guilds were associated with Sufi orders in the Islamic world, with medieval mystical orders in Christian Europe, and in India, the same way. You can see it. You can see it coming down the centuries. And it involved actually not only the plastic arts, but even the arts which are in time, such as poetry and music, and for certain traditions, dance, like Hindu dance, which is both in time and space. Now, mind you, from the point of perennial philosophy, the principles are universal. It's philosophia perennis et universalis, as was said by Kumaraswamy. But their applications are not everywhere the same. For example, we don't have any theater in Islamic civilization. Like you had the Greek sacred theater and you have the Hindu sacred theater. Or the Hindu dance, the temple dancing in India. You don't have that in mosques in the Islamic world, nor do you have it in the cathedrals in Christianity or churches in Christianity. So when we talk about the perennial philosophy and its application to sacred art, it didn't mean that everything had to be exactly the same everywhere. In fact, one of the most important points that people criticize the traditionalists who defend perennial philosophy like myself about is the question of unity and uniformity. Uniformity is not unity. It's the very antipode of unity. The perennial philosophy is based on the unity of the truth, but not on the uniformity of its manifestation. We all being human beings, every religion, every civilization has had to cater certain basic needs which makes it similar. How you deal with your father is mentioned by the Polynesian islanders as well as in Ireland and everything in between, every land in between, obviously. But others are particular to particular races, ethnic groups, languages, the genius that God has given to different peoples, like the different beauty of different flowers. They don't all look identical. What makes the garden so beautiful is not uniformity. It's a really reflection of a spiritual unity, which is reflected in the multiplicity of forms. Now, I could go on forever, but what I want to do now, and to conclude my short talk to you, is so what? What importance is the perennial philosophy? Why is it important today? In order to fully understand that, you first have to understand fully where we are. Don't fool ourselves. We are in a worldview that is now experiencing a death pang. The worldview that began, the Weltanschauung that began with the 17th century scientific revolution, with roots in the Renaissance, and grew in the 18th and 19th centuries, and in the 20th century, and is now falling apart. The falling apart we see everywhere, from ethics to even religious tenets, churches which have neglected the metaphysical aspect of their own tradition, to art, to everything. We see that. The pollution of the environment is only an external sign of it. As I wrote many years ago, before it became common to talk about the environmental crisis in my book on man and nature, I wrote that the pollution of nature is an external sign of the pollution of inner man. Our inner being, having become polluted, then become the major polluters of the earth. We destroyed the balance of the earth. And now everybody's seeing it. And we know that we cannot go on like this. Everybody, even those who are atheists, realize that. Now, therefore, the perennial philosophy has a very important message to convey. It doesn't want to force everybody to follow it. Only those qualified, intellectually, spiritually, morally, ethically, will be attracted to it. Others will not. Or let's hope they find the path somewhere else, wherever it happens to be. But for those who are attracted to it, it provides a cohesive alternative to the dominant worldview that is falling apart, but at the same time, people are clinging to it. I don't have time here to talk about Darwinian evolution. Perennial philosophy is against the whole idea of Darwinian evolution. It believes in the archetypal forms that transcend the material world and manifest themselves in the material world, biological world at a particular moment of time. And you don't have a continued changing of one form to another, so forms have no longer any meaning. I don't want to get into that discussion. I'm sure some people in this conference are going to talk about it. But this is a very difficult thing to criticize because the peg of the tent of the modern world, and everybody wants to cling to it no matter what. But it is a very shaky peg at the present moment. And the perennial philosophy offers an alternative which is both viable and true, both veritable and viable. And it is drawing more and more people to itself. There's no doubt about it. The number of students at major universities in this country, before I broke my leg, I used to lecture often in various universities. I know the university is quite well. I'm still teaching at this age. I have many students who come from all over the world. There's a great deal of interest, which didn't exist even 30, 40 years ago, because the worldview with which the young student entered university is now shattered. It's now broken. The intelligent people realize that. So the only alternative to have is either to become nihilists or to go for some kind of fundamentalism, cling to some kind of limited understanding of the truth in the form of fundamentalism, whether it's Islamic or Christian, or it's all over the world. Hindu, now you have Hindu fundamentalism ruling over India. Can you imagine the land of Sri Ramana Maharshi? But that's the case we have. There's no other choice. There's no other choice. We have to face this reality, and the perennial philosophy is there to help those who are competent to understand it. And from the religious point of view, it's a grace from heaven. It's not there to make money, to gain power. When Europeans spread Western philosophy in India, the British, that was combined with the love for power to dominate over the Indian colony. Whereas the perennial philosophy does not have any goals in mind. Its goal is the statement of the truth. And the highest thing that one can do in life, according to the perennial philosophy, is to know the truth and to live by it. Not to benefit financially, power-wise, social-wise, and so forth and so on. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you, Christ said. That's exactly the point of view of the perennial philosophy when it comes to understanding and adopting this point of view. It's not a proselytizing activity at all, but one which tries, on the basis of the importance of truth and of mercy, to try to make available a worldview which makes sense to those who hold it, which they're able to understand the enigmas and even the contradictions that we face in the world today, in this world which is so chaotic and so difficult to traverse and find the compass to journey through, which we have to do in life. We have no choice. We're born here, we live in this time, we have to go through life. And so let me conclude by saying that I'm very glad that Notre Dame thought of having this conference to start with. Even if many people disagree with what the perennialists believe the perennial philosophy to be, the traditionalists believe it to be, that's all right. The fact that it's being discussed is a very, very important matter. And I tried to at least get the title of the lectures that were given before I gave this lecture today, that some of them are very interesting, and I look forward to reading the text when they come out. And I wish the people at Notre Dame who are responsible for this success in carrying out its conclusion and making the thought available to the larger public. Thank you very much. I don't know who's in charge of this session, but if there are any questions, a few questions, I'll be glad to take.
I have a question. I don't want to interrupt whatever is going on. My name is Krishna Keshavadas. Should I go ahead? Yes. Thank you, Professor Nasr, for your very nice presentation. It was a pleasure to listen, and as well as your comment about Darwin. I very much appreciate that, very much so. So my question, though, is I'm coming as a practitioner of what's called the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, or Bhakti Yoga, which emphasizes this more of a metaphysical dialectic foundation, not so much a pure monism or a pure dualism, but this dialectic, which recognizes the identity of identity and difference. Now, from what I heard of your discussion, it seems like the emphasis of the perennial philosophy seems to be more monistic, where when you said what is the real, it can't be spoken about. It is beyond the words. It can't be spoken about. But then you went ahead and said that it's infinite, which means you can't place any limitations on it. So from what I've learned from my teachers, my perspective is that is, to me, saying that the truth, the fundamental absolute truth is something that cannot be spoken about, period, seems to be placing a limitation on it. And I think that limitation comes from not distinguishing between our speech and the fact that sound or the spoken is coming as an experience within the absolute context. So perhaps we cannot speak about the truth itself from our limited effort, but from a personalistic conception, coming from an idea that the reality is fundamentally personal, that the absolute is fundamentally personal, then that truth can speak about itself, and that is the idea behind revealed truth in the scriptures, I believe. So my humble offering and I guess question for you to comment on is, perhaps it gives the wrong idea to say that the truth, absolute truth, fundamentally can't be spoken about, but more appropriately to say that we cannot try to grasp at it from our finite perspective through words, but the words can be revealed, and that adequately can lead one to know about the truth.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. Those two are not contradictory. Whatever you say of the absolute truth, you limit by the language that you use, obviously, by the place you are, by who you are, and so forth. But it's an indication of a reality that is, that indication itself is real, that leads to it. Let me turn to my own tradition. I'm a Muslim. God has revealed in Islam many names of himself. The supreme name is the name Allah. Everybody knows the word Allah. Now, what Allah is an infinity, infinite reality. I cannot know. But God has given me the ability to know that I cannot know him in his infinite reality. So there's something of me that is allowed to penetrate into the very highest reality, which is that of God, in order to gain this knowledge that it cannot be discursively explained. But that truth manifests itself by the word Allah itself, which I can utter. I'm sitting right in front of you, I say Allah. That's, and the deepest sense, for example, Sufism, we believe that ultimately only Allah pronounces his own name. When I say Allah, it's the God within my heart that says Allah. But I won't get into that discussion, but I have similar views in Hinduism. But the two are not contradictory at all. First of all, if you have a personal view of the divinity, you also have, of course, the non-personal, the Advaita point of view, the non-dualistic. I would not call it monism. Monism is a rationalistic philosophy, which is bound by that very idea. So we call it non-duality. Advaita Vedanta is called non-dualistic Vedanta. I would correct, not monistic Vedanta. Because when you say God is one, it doesn't mean that he is limited by his oneness. What I was saying in Arabic is that God is one without being limited by his oneness. He's even beyond that. Beyond there, the imagination stops, and our mental faculties cannot go any further. But his reality descends into our mental faculty, even to our imaginal faculty, our emotional faculty, and all parts of our being can participate actually in reaching that reality. This issue that discussed is very interesting. This is a consequence of discussing matters which never in history were discussed, not only on internet, there was no internet until a few years ago, but in a conference. It was always these matters were discussed between a master and a student and a disciple, and something transmitted. Some things were said unsaid. There was a knowledge of unsaying, the wisdom of unsaying, you might say. And that's a very important issue. I did not get into that, but the perennial philosophy does not negate what you said at all. Is there anybody else who has a question? I think there's a gentleman. Oh, Juan Polit. What's Juan Polit doing here?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Nasr. It was a brilliant talk. I really benefited a lot. But I'm going to ask the question about, Stephen Katz says that there is no perennial philosophy because
There's no what?
Perennial philosophy. Stephen Katz says that there is no perennial philosophy.
Yes.
Claiming that there cannot be unmediated mystical experience. Did you get that? Unmediated.
Yes, I know Stephen Katz very well.
How can you answer that question?
Stephen Katz should have said that I have not experienced the ultimate truth, therefore I don't have it. But to say nobody else can do so is a bit of an extrapolation, to put it mildly. I would never make a statement like that. I mean, why? If I cannot understand something, I cannot say nobody else understands it either. You have this whole army of great sages and saints and philosophers and intellectual figures have dominated global civilizations for thousands of years, all of whom believe that there is such a thing. And then suddenly Stephen Katz comes along, whose philosophy is logical positivism, but who's interested in religion and trying to apply categories of logical positivism to religious thought, and comes up with this idea, and especially to mysticism. I said when Professor Cornell, I invited me several times to lecture at Cornell for them in his class, and I know him quite well. And I told him himself, he's a brilliant scholar. I hope God keeps him safe and sound and healthy. But to claim that there is no such thing as perennial philosophy because I cannot find it, it needs a little bit of humility. She said, I don't find it. All right, fine. But there are others who do find it. And it's not possible to answer every single criticism that is made here and there against the perennial philosophy. There are too many people writing too many things. The main points have been answered already by people like Guénon and Schwann and others, but and Titus Burkhardt, especially in some of his works. But there are always new criticisms come up. Stephen Katz's point of view is now negated by the followers of Derrida and sort of postmodernism. They don't accept Katz anymore. So now we have to provide a new set of answers for them. And that's going to come. The people continue from different philosophical points of view to criticize the perennial philosophy. What I sought to do was not to answer every single school that has come along or is bound to come along, but to give general ideas which, in a sense, perhaps can be helpful in confronting that. Well, I think I've said enough. I've tired you out. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope you have a very good conference, the rest of it, of the program, and I look forward to reading what my dear colleagues have spoken about these days. Thank you very much. Goodbye.